She was standing on my porch at 7 in the morning, holding the railing with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright, and she was wearing a hospital bracelet on her left wrist. I had never seen her before in my life. She looked at me for a moment like she was deciding something, and then she said she did not have much time and she needed me to listen. She said her daughter had 2 sons with my husband. She said the older boy was 8 years old. She said she had been carrying this secret for 9 years because her daughter had asked her to, and she was dying now and she was not going to die with it. Then she pressed a folded envelope into my hand, told me everything I needed was inside, and said she was sorry. She was gone before I could say a single word. I am Camila. I had been married to my husband Kevin for 11 years. I thought I knew every room of his life. I thought the weekends he spent away were for work. I thought the distance I had felt growing between us for years was just the natural settling of a long marriage. I thought a lot of things that morning that I stopped thinking by that afternoon, because I opened the envelope. And what was inside it did not just end my marriage. It rewrote the last 9 years of my life from the very first page. Before I tell you what was in that envelope, I need to ask you something real. If a dying stranger showed up at your door and handed you the truth about your own life, would you want to open it? Or would part of you want to hand it back and keep living in the version you already knew? Because that question sat with me for the 20 minutes, I held that envelope before I opened it. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. And stay with me, because what Camilla found inside changed not just her marriage, but the lives of 2 little boys who had never asked to be a secret. I want to tell you about the envelope before I tell you about anything else, because the envelope is where the real story begins. It was a standard white letter envelope, the kind you buy in bulk from any office supply store. It was sealed, and it had my name written on the front in handwriting I did not recognize. Just my first name, Camilla, written carefully, like someone who had practiced it. Like someone who had been thinking about this moment for a long time and wanted to get even the small details right. I stood on my porch for a moment after the woman left. I watched her walk to a car parked at the curb, a dark blue sedan with someone waiting in the driver's seat, and the car pulled away slowly. The way cars move when the person inside them is very tired or very ill. And then I looked down at the envelope in my hands, and I stood there in my doorway in my pajamas at 7 in the morning, and I made the decision that I think about more than almost any other decision I have ever made. I went inside. I sat down at the kitchen table. I made myself a cup of coffee first, which I think now was my mind's way of buying 20 minutes to exist in the last version of my life before it changed. I drank half the cup. Then I opened the envelope. Inside there were 4 things: a photograph, a handwritten letter on 3 pages of lined notebook paper, a photocopy of a birth certificate, and a photocopy of a second birth certificate. I looked at the photograph first. It showed my husband Kevin at a backyard barbecue. He was smiling the way he smiles when he is genuinely relaxed, the open smile I had not seen directed at me in several years. Beside him was a woman I did not know, maybe 30 years old, dark-haired, pretty in an uncomplicated way. And in front of them, one on each side, were 2 small boys. The older one was maybe 7 or 8. The younger one maybe 4 or 5. Both boys had Kevin's jaw. The specific shape of it, squared at the corners, a detail so particular to his face that I had always considered it a private thing, something that belonged to us, to our family. I had a daughter with that jaw. I set the photograph down. I picked up the birth certificates. The first one listed a boy named Marcus Allen Reyes, born 8 years and 4 months ago. The father's name on the certificate was Kevin Allen Hargrove, my husband's full name. The mother's name was a woman named Destiny Reyes. The second one listed a boy named Jordan Kevin Reyes, born 5 years and 2 months ago. Same father, same mother. I put both certificates down on the table, and I looked at them for a long time without picking up the letter. I want to try to describe what I felt in that moment accurately because I think the accuracy matters. It was not the feeling I had always imagined betrayal would feel like, which was something sharp and sudden, like a cut. It was more like the floor had simply stopped being where I thought it was. There was no sharp pain. There was just the sensation of a foundation being absent where I had been standing, and the very slow understanding that I had been ding on nothing for a long time. I picked up the letter. The woman's name was Gloria Reyes. She was Destiny's mother. She wrote in a clear, careful hand with occasional crossings out where she had restarted a sentence. She said she had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 7 months earlier and that she had less than a month left. She said she had known about Kevin and Destiny's relationship for 9 years, since before Marcus was born. She said Destiny had asked her, begged her, never to contact me. Destiny believed Kevin was going to leave me eventually, and she did not want anything to disrupt that process. Gloria had honored that request for 9 years. She was not going to honor it anymore. She wrote that Kevin had been with Destiny consistently for 9 years, that he spent most weekends at Destiny's home, a house he had helped pay for, a house where his 2 sons had been raised to call him Dad. She wrote that she had watched those boys grow up calling my husband their father. She wrote that she had watched her daughter wait for 9 years for a man to choose her fully, and that she had watched him never fully choose anyone, and that she was tired of the damage that silence had done to everyone it touched, including me, who had never been given the chance to make an informed decision about my own life. She included Destiny's address. She included Kevin's second phone number, the one I had never known existed, with a note that it was registered under a variant of his middle name. She included a screenshot she had printed of a text conversation between Kevin and Destiny from 3 months prior in which Kevin had told Destiny he would be free to move in with her fully within the next year because things at home were almost resolved. Things at home were almost resolved. I read that sentence 4 times. I was things at home. I put the letter down. I finished my coffee. It had gone cold. I drank it cold because I needed something to do with my hands. My daughter Rosie was still asleep upstairs. She was 9 years old and she was going to wake up in about an hour and come downstairs wanting cereal and a cartoon and a normal Saturday morning, and I was going to give her exactly that. But first, I needed to sit with what I had just read and decide, very carefully, what I was going to do with it. I want to tell you about Kevin before I go further because you need to understand what I was working with, who I thought I was married to, and how long the architecture of the lie had been standing. Kevin and I met when I was 24. He was 30, already established in a mid-level operations role at a logistics company, steady and capable in the way that felt like security when you are 24 and have not yet learned to distinguish between steadiness and stillness. We dated for 2 years, married when I was 26. Rosie was born when I was 28. She was planned and wanted, and we were happy in the early years in a way that felt real because I believe it was real. Whatever Kevin was doing in the years that followed, the early version of our life together had genuine warmth in it, and I am not going to rewrite that just because the later version was a lie. Rosie was about 8 months old when Kevin started taking on weekend work. That was how he framed it. The company was expanding. His role required more travel. There were regional hubs that needed his attention every few weeks. I believed him because there was no reason not to, and because I was home with an infant, and I did not have the bandwidth to interrogate a story that arrived with a logical structure already built around it. The weekends away became a rhythm. 2 weekends a month, sometimes 3. He always called from whatever city he said he was in. He always came back with the right energy, slightly tired, a takeout container from some airport or another, the specific kind of return that looks exactly like a work trip looks. I had moments of unease over the years. Everyone in a long marriage does. There were times when something felt off in a way I could not locate precisely. A text message he answered in another room. A name that came up once and then was never mentioned again. A weekend where the city he said he was in had weather that did not match what he described when he got home. I noticed all of it and filed all of it, and in every case I found a way to make it fit the version of the story I preferred. That is not weakness. I want to say that clearly. That is what happens when you love someone and you have built a life with them, and you have a child and a home and a shared history, and the alternative to the innocent explanation is something so large and so damaging that your mind simply refuses to complete the thought. But Gloria Reyes had completed it for me. Marcus was born when Rosie was 8 months old. Kevin had a second child the same year he was coming home to our infant daughter. The timeline sat in my chest. Ike something physical. I called my sister Renata that morning after Rosie woke up and had her cereal and settled in front of her cartoons. I went upstairs to our bedroom and I closed the door and I called Renata and I read her the letter. Renata was silent for a long time after I finished. Then she said she was coming over. I said no. I said not yet. I said I needed to think before anyone else was in the room with me, because once other people were in the room, the situation would start moving according to other people's emotions, and I needed it to move according to mine first. She said she understood, but that she was parking 2 blocks away and would come the moment I called. That was Renata. She has always understood the difference between being present and being useful. I spent the rest of that morning in a state of surface normality that I think was one of the harder performances of my life. I made Rosie lunch. I helped her with a craft project. I answered 3 text messages from Kevin, who was away that weekend at what he had told me was a regional operations review in a city 4 hours away. His texts were normal. A photo of a hotel breakfast. A message saying he missed us. A question about whether Rosie's soccer practice had been rescheduled. I answered each one normally. I said the hotel breakfast looked good. I said we missed him too. I said practice was still Sunday morning. I was gathering myself. I was becoming very clear in the way that only the deepest kind of shock can make you clear, when everything non-essential falls away and you can see exactly what is real and what you need to do about it. That afternoon, while Rosie napped, I did 4 things. I photographed every item in the envelope individually with my phone and emailed the photos to myself and to a secondary email account Kevin did not know about. I then put the originals back in the envelope and placed the envelope at the bottom of my personal document box in the back of my closet, under my passport and old tax returns. I searched for a family law attorney online. I was looking for someone specific, not the cheapest option and not the most aggressive. I wanted someone with a reputation for being thorough and strategic. I found a woman named Adrienne Cole, whose firm had strong reviews and whose bio described an approach built on documentation and long-term positioning. I sent a contact form message asking for the earliest available appointment. I searched for the address Gloria had included in the letter on a mapping application. It was 22 minutes from our house. I looked at it on the street view and I saw a modest single-story home with a small front yard and a bicycle on the porch. A child's bicycle, red with training wheels. I sat with that image for a long time. Then I searched Kevin's second phone number, the one Gloria had included in a reverse lookup directory. The name attached to the number was listed as K. Allen. His middle name was Allen. He had not even worked very hard to hide it. He had simply counted on me never looking. I did not call the number. I was not ready for that yet, and I did not know what calling it would set in motion. I wrote it down in the back of a small notebook I kept in my bedside drawer, and I underlined it once. Adrienne Cole's office called me the following Monday morning. Her assistant offered me a Tuesday afternoon slot that had opened due to a cancellation. I took it. I want to tell you about that Tuesday appointment because it was the first time I said the situation out loud to someone outside my own head, and saying it out loud changed it in a way I had not expected. Adrienne Cole was a tall woman in her late 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and a manner that was neither warm nor cold, but extremely present. She listened to the entire situation without writing anything down. When I finished, she picked up her pen and wrote one sentence on her notepad, which she then turned to show me. It said, "How long has the financial exposure been running?" That question reframed everything. I had been thinking about the betrayal in emotional terms, the lie, the second family, the 9 years. Adrienne was thinking about it in structural terms. She was thinking about a man who had been maintaining 2 households on what I had always assumed was a single income, and what that meant for the assets we jointly held and the financial picture of our marriage. She asked me about our accounts. Joint checking, joint savings, a retirement account we had opened together 12 years ago, a refinanced mortgage on our house. She asked whether I had independent access to our financial records or whether Kevin managed them. I said Kevin handled most of the financial administration. I paid household bills from the joint checking account, but Kevin managed the investment accounts and the mortgage and what I had always understood to be our savings strategy. Adrian's expression did not change, but her P. N moved. She told me to pull every financial statement I could access before our next meeting. Bank statements going back 2 years, credit card statements, any investment account documents, the mortgage most recent statement. She told me not to move any money and not to tip off Kevin in any way. She told me to simply gather and document. I went home and I started gathering. What I found over the next 4 days of quiet searching through records I had always had access to, but had never closely examined, sat in my stomach like a stone I could not shift. Our joint savings account, which I had believed held roughly $60,000 based on the last time I had asked Kevin about it, and he had given me a number, held $14,000. $46,000 was gone. I pulled 2 years of statements. The withdrawals were not dramatic. They were steady and moderate, and always just below the threshold that might have triggered an alert or a conversation. 300 here, 500 there. Occasional larger withdrawals of 2 or 3,000, spaced irregularly, each one individually explainable as a home repair or a car expense or a work cost, but collectively forming a pattern that was unmistakable once you laid the statements side by side and added the numbers. The money had been leaving our account for at least 2 years. Probably longer, but 2 years was what I had in front of me. I photographed every statement. I sent them to Adrian that evening with a message that said I had found something and needed to speak with her before our scheduled appointment if possible. She called me the next morning. She said what I had found was significant and that it changed the strategic picture considerably. She said what I had documented suggested a pattern of financial dissipation from marital assets, which had legal implications beyond the question of the marriage itself. She said I had done exactly the right thing by documenting everything before taking any other action. She said we needed to move to the next phase. I asked her what the next phase was. She said it was time to understand the full picture of where the money had gone and to make sure that picture was protected before Kevin had any reason to suspect I was looking. I want to tell you about the weekend. Kevin came home 3 days after I had found the bank statements, because it was the first time I had to be in the same room with him while carrying everything I now knew, and I need you to understand what that takes. He came home on a Sunday evening. He was in a good mood. He brought Rosie a small toy from the airport gift shop, a stuffed animal of some kind, a bear in a city-branded t-shirt. He hugged me at the door. He smelled like himself, a specific combination of the soap he always used and something underneath it that I could now identify as the particular smell of someone who has been somewhere they are not telling you about. He asked about the weekend. I told him about Rosie's soccer practice, about the movie we had watched Saturday night, about a leak under the kitchen sink I had noticed that probably needed attention. He said he would look at it. I made dinner. We ate together, the three of us, and Kevin helped Rosie with a math worksheet after dinner and put her to bed and read her 2 chapters of the book they had been working through together. And I sat downstairs and listened to his voice coming down through the ceiling, and I thought about Marcus and Jordan and a red bicycle on a porch 22 minutes away. When he came downstairs, I was sitting with a book I was not reading. He sat down across from me, and he said he was tired and asked if I wanted to watch something. I said sure. We watched 40 minutes of a show we had been following together. He fell asleep on the couch. I turned off the television and went upstairs, and I lay in our bed, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about the 11 years of Sundays that had looked exactly like this one, and wondered how many of them had been what I thought they were. The answer, I was beginning to understand, was fewer than I had believed. Over the following 2 weeks, I continued to build the picture. Adrian had connected me with a forensic accountant named Douglas Park who specialized in marital asset cases. I met with Douglas twice. He was methodical and unsentimental in a way I found enormously helpful. He asked questions without inflection, received answers without reaction, and produced a working document that tracked the financial outflow from our accounts with a precision that turned what had felt like a fog of betrayal into a set of clean, numbered facts. The total documented dissipation over 2 years was approximately $53,000. Douglas believed the actual figure, going back further, was likely significantly higher. He also identified a retirement account contribution pattern that had shifted 3 years ago in a way that, while not technically improper, suggested that Kevin had reduced his own contribution to the joint account in favor of what Douglas called an unaccounted personal allocation. In plain language, Kevin had been quietly underfunding our shared future while funding a different one. I want to tell you about the moment I decided to drive to Destiny's address, because it was not a decision I made impulsively, and it was not a decision I made with any kind of aggressive intent. I made it after 2 weeks of documentation and 2 meetings with Adrian and a conversation with my sister Renata that lasted 3 hours, and ended with Renata saying that the only person in this entire situation who had not yet had the chance to make a real choice was me. She was right. Gloria had made her choice. Kevin had made his choices repeatedly for 9 years. Destiny had made hers. The only person operating without full information was me. And I had decided I was done operating without full information. I drove to the address on a Wednesday morning when Kevin was at work and Rosie was at school. I parked across the street and I sat in my car for about 10 minutes before I got out. The house was small and well kept. The red bicycle was still on the porch. There were 2 pairs of small sneakers by the front door, different sizes, lined up neatly the way children line up shoes when an adult has taught them to do it consistently. A wind chime by the door, potted plants on either side of the steps. I walked up and I knocked. The woman who opened the door was the woman from the photograph, Destiny Reyes. She was wearing a work blouse and holding a coffee mug, and she clearly had not expected this. She looked at me and I saw the exact moment she understood who I was. Her face did not go through a sequence of expressions. It simply went still. I said I was not there to fight. I said I needed 5 minutes. She stepped back and let me in. We sat at her kitchen table. The house was quiet. The boys were at school. She held her coffee mug with both hands and looked at it more than she looked at me, and I did not blame her for that. I looked around the kitchen at the crayon drawings on the refrigerator, the height chart on the doorframe with names and dates written in marker, the small backpack hooks on the wall with two backpacks hanging from them. Evidence of a life that had been running in parallel with mine, ordinary and domestic and real. I said one thing. I said I had opened an envelope 5 days earlier, and I now knew everything that was in it, and I was not there to assign blame or to cause pain to her children, and I was not going to pretend the situation was simple. But I said I needed her to know that I knew, and I needed to ask her one question. She looked up. I asked her if she had known he was still with me. Still living in our house, still married. She was quiet for a long time, then she said yes. She said she had known from the beginning. She said she had told herself it was temporary. She said she had believed for years that it was almost over. She said she had believed him. I said I understood. And I meant it, not in a way that excused anything, but in the way that you understand something when you recognize that another person was also lied to, just with a different set of lies using a different door. I asked her one more thing. I asked if her mother was still alive. Her expression changed. She said her mother had passed 4 days ago. I told her I was sorry. I told her that her mother had been a braver person than anyone had given her the chance to be for 9 years, and that she had done the right thing even at the end. Destiny looked at her coffee and did not say anything, and I stood up and thanked her for letting me in, and I left. I sat in my car for a long time before I drove away. What I felt in that car is something I have tried to describe to myself many times, and I still do not have perfect language for it. It was grief and clarity at the same time, which sounds like a contradiction but is not. The grief was for the version of my marriage that had existed only in my own understanding of it. The clarity was for everything I now needed to do and the clean, certain knowledge of how to do it. I drove home and I called Adrienne and I told her I was ready. The formal process began the following week. Adrienne filed the initial papers on a Thursday. Kevin came home that Thursday evening, and there was an envelope on the kitchen counter that I had placed there intentionally in a visible spot, because I had decided I did not want to hand it to him in person, and I did not want him to receive it through a server when Rosie was home. He saw the envelope. He picked it up. He looked at me. I said Rosie was at my sister's for the night and that he should read it. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat with Gloria's envelope 3 weeks earlier, and he opened it and read it. It did not take long. Legal documents are efficient. When he finished, he put the papers down and he looked at me and he said my name the way people say a name when they have no other sentence ready. I said I knew about Destiny. I said I knew about Marcus and Jordan. I said I knew about the money. I said I had documentation of all of it and it was already in my attorney's possession. He did not deny any of it. I want to say that. He did not attempt a version of events or a reframing. He looked at the table and he was quiet, and then he said he was sorry. I told him sorry was a word, and what I needed was a process, and we would do the process through attorneys. He said he wanted to talk about Rosie. I said we would talk about Rosie through the process, and that the process would protect her, and that was the only thing I wanted to discuss about our daughter in this context. He asked if he should leave. I said he should figure out where he wanted to stay, and that I expected him to be considerate of Rosie in how he handled the transition. He left that night with a bag. He did not make a scene. He did not argue. There was something about his manner in those final hours in our house that I have thought about since. It was the manner of someone who had been waiting for a particular thing to happen for a long time and who was, underneath the damage of the moment, slightly relieved that the waiting was over. I have my own theory about that. I think Kevin had been living in the exhaustion of a double life for 9 years and had not had the courage to end it himself in either direction, and had simply continued because continuation was easier than decision. Gloria Reyes had made the decision for him by putting an envelope in my hands. I will never know whether to be grateful for that or to mourn the years it cost me. I have decided to hold both things at once. The divorce proceedings lasted 8 months. They were not simple, but they were not dramatic either. Adrian was exceptional. The financial documentation Douglas Park had prepared created a factual foundation that Kevin's attorney could not meaningfully contest. The dissipation claim was settled in a way that restored a significant portion of what had left our joint accounts. The house was addressed in terms of equity. The retirement accounts were divided correctly. Kevin did not fight the terms in the way I had expected him to. Adrian said this was not unusual when documentation was comprehensive, and the other side had nothing credible to offer as a counter-narrative. I think it was also, at least in part, because Kevin was not a cruel man. He was a weak one, which is a different, and in some ways harder thing to be, because weakness dressed as kindness can deceive everyone, including the person doing it, for a very long time. Rosie was the part I focused on above all else. She was 9 when this began and 10 when it was finalized, and she is a child with a specific and serious kind of emotional intelligence that I have respected since she was very small. I did not tell her everything. She was too young for everything. But I told her the truth in the portions she was ready for, gently and at her pace, without making her father into a villain and without asking her to carry my grief. I told her that her father and I were not going to live together anymore, and that this was an adult problem that had nothing to do with her, and that both of us loved her with no conditions attached. She cried. Of course she cried. And I held her and let her cry, and I did not make it about me. Kevin has been consistent with Rosie in the time since. His custody schedule is real and he shows up for it. He is, as a father, more present in the structured time he has with her now than he sometimes was when he was living in our house. I have wondered about that, and I think I understand it. A man who has been splitting himself in 2 directions for nearly a decade, when he is finally forced to be wholly present in one place at a time, sometimes finds that he is better at being present than he had been when divided. I do not say this warmly. I say it accurately. There are things that happened after the divorce was finalized that I want to tell you about because they complete the picture. Kevin's mother called me about a month after the divorce was final. Her name is Patricia, and she had always been pleasant to me in a surface way that never went very deep. She called and she said she was so sorry for what had happened, and that she hoped I knew she had not known about any of it. I told her I appreciated her calling. She said she felt she owed me an honest conversation, and then she said something I had not expected. She said she had suspected something was wrong for several years. She said there had been details over the years, small things, that had not added up, and that she had chosen not to look at them directly because she had not wanted to know. She said she regretted that. I told her that choosing not to know was also a choice and that its consequences were real, but that I did not hold it against her, and that I hoped she would stay connected to Rosie because Rosie needed her grandmother, and that relationship had nothing to do with what her son had done. She cried. I did not. My sister Renata was the person who held me together during those 8 months in ways I will never fully be able to describe. She was the one who sat with me when the paperwork felt impossible and the grief came back in waves, and I questioned every choice I had made. Not the choices I had made in the preceding months, but the choices I had made 11 years ago. The choices that had led to this kitchen table, and this envelope, and this rearrangement of everything I thought was true. She never let me stay in that questioning too long. She would wait until I finished, and then she would say the same thing every time. The choices he made are not a reflection of the choices you made. That is a distinction that takes a long time to understand in your body and not just your head. She helped me get there. I want to tell you about Gloria Reyes one more time because I have thought about her more than anyone else in this story except my daughter. She was 63 years old. She had been living with what she knew for 9 years. She had watched her daughter wait for a man who was never fully coming. She had watched 2 grandsons grow up in a situation built on a lie she was complicit in by her silence. And in the last weeks of her life, with nothing left to lose and nothing left to protect, she had decided to do the one thing she should have done years earlier. She had told the truth. I found her obituary online about 2 weeks after she knocked on my door. It was short and kind. It said she had been a devoted mother and grandmother. It said she had worked for 30 years as a school librarian. It said she was survived by her daughter and 2 grandsons. I printed the obituary and I put it in the same folder as the envelope she had brought me. Not because I am sentimental about the pain, but because I believe in acknowledging the people who change your life, even when the change is brutal, even when the truth they hand you costs you everything you thought you had. She gave me my life back, the version of it that was real. And she did it with a folded envelope and 4 sentences and the courage of a woman who had decided that a clean death was worth more than a comfortable silence. I am not the same person I was on the morning she knocked on my door. I do not mean that in a motivational way. I mean it as a plain fact. A person who has had the floor removed from under them and has then rebuilt a floor, plank by plank, with their own hands and their own choices, is structurally different from the person who was standing on someone else's construction without knowing it. My life now is smaller in some ways and more solid in every way that matters. I work full-time in a communications role I had left to focus on our family, and returned to when I needed to and found, to my relief, that the skills were still there and the professional relationships were still largely intact and that the world had not stopped turning in my absence. I run on Saturday mornings. I have a garden. I have Rosie, who is 11 now and ferocious and hilarious and asks questions about everything, and I answer them as honestly as she is ready for. I have Renata, who parks 2 blocks away when I need her and comes the moment I call. I have a folder in my filing cabinet that holds a white envelope, 2 birth certificates, a 3-page letter in careful handwriting, a photograph, and an obituary. I do not open it often, but I know it is there. And knowing it is there reminds me of the difference between what I thought was true and what actually was. And that difference is the most valuable thing I own, because it means I will never again confuse the two. I am Camila. A dying woman knocked on my door and handed me the truth about my own life. It cost me everything I thought I had, and it gave me back everything that was actually mine.